1994, 4 years before he died, he called into the Stern Show to say he thought it was okay for the government to control what kids could listen to. Howard hung up on him. For weeks after Anthony left, I had no idea where he was living. No one in my house spoke to me about it. I don't even know if my parents knew where he was. Then one day at school, a kid who always used to shake me down, Alan Franklin, stopped me in the hallway. He lived in the slums of Uniondale. "Hey," he said, "your brother's living next door to me. Give me a quarter." Soon after that, my brother came to the house to see me. He still wanted nothing to do with my parents, but I was just his little brother. I didn't do anything wrong. One day he picked me up and he brought me to his new place right next to Alan's. There were 12 white guys who looked like hippies in the middle of this run-down black neighborhood. Everyone in the living room was wearing a dashiki and smoking something. One of them had a waterbed, and I remember thinking, this isn't a house where a mother lives, which is exactly why my brother moved in. Eventually, he tried to make peace with my parents. A week before he graduated, he went to see them. Everyone apologized. He wanted them in the crowd when he received his diploma. But as he walked across the stage that night, he couldn't resist making a personal statement against authority. When the principal offered him a handshake, my brother blew past him. I didn't even notice it, but my parents did. Anthony was going out with friends after the ceremony, and when my parents and I got into our car, I could tell everyone was mad. The silence was thick with tension, so I asked what was going on. My mom said to me, "Did you see that Anthony wouldn't shake his principal's hand?" They were mortified. It was a couple of months before they all spoke to one another again. For all of Anthony's outward rebellion, Stephen was the one my mom worried about most. "It's the quiet ones you've got to look out for," she used to say. Everyone always said that Anthony and I were my mother's kids, while Stephen was my father's. He was thinner than we were, although he had dark hair, he had fairer skin. He was also so much more chill. The arguing we did in the house wasn't his scene at all, but he had a wicked sense of humor that tickled my mom and helped him get away with stuff. One year he got her a t-shirt that read, "Not a well woman." If Anthony or I had given her that shirt, she would have blown her top, but because Stephen did it, she thought it was hysterical. Until Anthony moved out, Stephen and I shared a room. We had our Brady Bunch moments, like when we'd split the room in half with tape. Only he'd always get the side with the door, and I'd have to give him a special pass if I wanted to get out and use the bathroom. Anthony's drama was out in the open and in your face, but Stephen's was bubbling inside. He didn't have screaming matches with my parents. He studied hard, made the honor roll, and was a member of the National Honor Society. He had orange crates full of records. There were hundreds in there, and he'd listen to them for hours by himself on the record player in our living room. One day, seemingly out of nowhere, he proved my mom's intuition right. When he was a junior in high school, he came home and announced that he had gotten a girl pregnant. This almost killed my folks. Their firstborn was a hippie who moved out of the house at 17, and now their secondborn knocked up a girl. To this day, I can't say for certain what happened after that announcement. I'm pretty sure the girl must have had an abortion. Every family has secrets, and in mine they were always kept from me because I was the youngest. But there's no way my family could keep quiet if there were a grandchild out there in the world who'd been put up for adoption. One night in Stephen's senior year, he snuck out of the house and went into the city with his friends. He never came home. When my parents woke up the next morning and he wasn't there, they called the police. They were frantic, pacing the rug, praying Stephen would walk through the door. When the cop arrived, he didn't seem too concerned. This was Long Island. Teenagers blew off curfew for a night in the city every weekend. But he still opened his pad and took notes on what Stephen was wearing, what his frame of mind was, and the last time my parents saw him. Then, as the cop started to tell him that he'd probably show up any minute, Stephen walked right through the door. He was wearing the clothes he had on the day before, and he looked like he hadn't slept. My mom ran to him, hugged him, and then shouted, "Where the hell have you been?" Stephen was vague. "I don't know," he said. "Some Colombian's house." "I can't believe you were at Columbia House," my mom screamed. "No, Mom," Stephen said, faking exasperation. "Columbia House is a record club. I stayed at a Colombian's house." We didn't know it at the time, but there was a reason he was being deliberately vague about where he had been. Stephen was gay. Who knows? Maybe that's why he was always so quiet and a little more aloof than the rest of us. Maybe that's why he liked to disappear while the rest of us swirled in the tornado. We all centered our lives around managing my mom and learning how to do that in a way that allowed us to function normally. Stephen was not only learning to cope with her breakdowns, he was also trying to figure out who he was, and not in the way that most teenagers discover themselves, like Anthony's rebellion. Being gay wasn't a phase Stephen could grow out of or a lifestyle choice he could reject. It was as much a part of him as the heart in his chest. And at that time, as a senior in high school, I don't think he had come to grips with it yet himself. How could he? He wasn't that far removed from getting a girl pregnant. And it was the 1970s. People weren't out and comfortable the way they are today. While he was living at home, Stephen didn't tell us anything. After Stephen graduated from high school, he moved out of the house. No drama, no fight. He just walked across the stage, shook the principal's hand, and moved into Manhattan. I'd visit him at his apartment about once a month. He was driving a cab then, and one afternoon, while I was waiting for him to come home after his shift, I decided to snoop around his place. I get antsy just sitting. I like to stand up and walk around and go places. As I rifled through some of the stuff in the bathroom, I noticed a bunch of gay men's magazines in the cabinet. I was shocked and a little scared. I worried that at that moment someone was going to come walking through the door. I quickly shoved them back in the cabinet and walked out of the bathroom. At the time, it never occurred to me they were Stephen's. I assumed they belonged to his roommate. For a long time, the only person who knew the truth in my family was Anthony. Stephen had told Anthony he was gay when he moved into the city right after high school. For years, Anthony kept pushing him to share the news with the rest of us, but that wasn't Stephen's style. I'm sure he was afraid of how my parents would react. He also hated the idea of making a scene. He'd been watching drama unfold his entire life and had worked hard to sidestep it. It just wasn't his way. But when I was a freshman in college, Stephen decided it was time to tell us. Or maybe he just got tired of Anthony's pestering him. He called Anthony and said, "Okay, I'm ready for them to know." Then he said, "You tell them." So Anthony did. Anthony was convinced my mom would lose it, my dad would sit at the table and stoically accept it. But it was the other way around. In that moment, my dad seemed stunned and in a state of disbelief, while my mom was totally accepting. I'm not surprised. As long as my mom could focus her worry, she was strong. It's when things were good and she looked at her own life that she started to lose it. A couple of nights later, I went to Anthony's place on Long Island, and he told me too. He was as blunt as Stephen was reluctant. As I sat down in his living room, he blurted out, "You know Stephen's gay, right?" I just said as casually as I could, "Oh yeah, of course I know," but I had no idea. I was blindsided. I remember leaving Anthony's and walking to my car and feeling numb. It was just so shocking. It didn't help that Anthony had said it so matter-of-factly. For a day or two, I desperately wanted to call Stephen and tell him that I knew and that I loved him and that no matter what, he was my brother. But he would have hated that. I would have been doing it for me, not for him. I realized that he tried to come out to me once in his own way a few months earlier. He'd invited me to a Sylvester concert at the Felt Forum, the arena attached to Madison Square Garden. Sylvester had a couple of big disco hits like Disco Heat and You Make Me Feel Mighty Real. When we arrived, I didn't pay much attention to the crowd. Then Sylvester made his entrance like a black Liberace. He was super gay. He wore a full-length mink coat, was accompanied by a 25-piece orchestra, and opened with